This is my fourth book review of the series. The book that I'm going to be reviewing is Girl in Pieces by Kathleen Glasgow. I do not have a physical copy of this book. I listened to it on audiobook, and I also read it on an online library for the library in my um, county, city, whatever. Um, But regardless, even if I don't have the book, I put the image up there in case you don't know what the book is. This book is relatively popular. Since I used to work at a bookstore, I remember when the book started getting really popular. It was published in 2016, but even when I was working there in 2020, 2021, all the way to last year in 2022, the book kept having certain surges of popularity, and I know that it's a really big book talk book. A lot of people on TikTok book reviewing accounts have been talking about it. So I decided to choose this one to review because it's probably out of the books I chose to review, probably the most um, not necessarily influential, but probably the most talked about on Book Talk right now and on BookTube. We Are Okay is definitely a popular book, and I already talked about it, but Girl in Pieces is definitely one that I knew was going to be extremely popular, so I wanted to do at least one really, really mainstream novel for these book reviews. So, this book tells the story of a girl named Charlotte Davis. She goes by Charlie, who has a really, really troubled upbringing and home life. She has lost a lot of important people to her in her life, and even lives homeless for an entire year due to having certain problems with her mother and other situations she goes through in that year of homelessness. And a lot of the stuff she experiences lead her to trying to take her own life. She self harms. So I would definitely look into that if it's a trigger for you. That's why I put a trigger warning for this particular book review. Some of the other book reviews I'm doing also have milder trigger warnings, but this one is definitely a book that is not as graphic as I expected in terms of that kind of situation, but it is more graphic and more descriptive than some people might be comfortable with, especially if they've been through self harm or any type of mental illness that led them to be in a psychiatric facility. Personally, in terms of the main character, I related to her a lot, even though I myself did not go through situations to the severity that she went through at 17 or 18 years old. I still related to her in terms of how she felt, and also in terms of how she was able to overcome a lot of stuff and keep going and keep pushing herself, because she knew that even if things were difficult, nobody else was going to have her back and she had to have her own. I know that sounds really dark and very sad, and I definitely got sad a lot of times in reading this book. And I don't want to say that resilience is something that I don't want to say that it's the only thing I enjoyed about the main character. I definitely thought she was a really well written character, and she seemed very believable for what she was going through, especially because of how she acted at the psychiatric facility. She had a very hard time communicating and talking, and that is definitely the type of symptom like selective mutism, or extreme shyness, or apathy. Those type of things a lot of times definitely happen with survivors of certain traumatic situations and experiences. I personally don't know much about it except through what I've read in fiction books or have watched in true crime documentaries. But definitely, I feel like for what I've experienced and for what I know other people in my life have experienced, I feel like her portrayal of self harm and mental illness was relatively accurate, and the author did a fantastic job in conveying that. The second half of the book is essentially Charlie adapting to life outside of the psychiatric facility, but no longer um, neither living with her mother that she does not get along with and who does not treat her very well, nor living on the streets and being homeless like she was for the year before she ended up in the psychiatric facility. She is basically starting a fresh new life, moves to a different state, and basically starts over, starts out living at her friend's landlord's kind of like shed apartment type thing. Um, I don't really want to spoil too much, but she ends up kind of making a life for herself there. It definitely isn't all, you know, it's not all roses and butterflies, but it's definitely a start for her. And I think that's another thing about the book that I really like. And it's a quality that in YA, I didn't really see very much when I read YA in high school. And I'm starting to see it more in books now. They write the books, they are still YA, they're about teenagers or young adults, but they tend to write these books more as a present moment, difficult situation. Yes, it is a traumatic situation. It does have shock value. The plot does move in some ways fast compared to adult fiction, but the book doesn't necessarily have like the perfect endings to certain situations, or some resolutions aren't perfect. And it leaves the reader wondering certain things about the character after you stop reading the book. And I think it's really hard for me to explain that because personally, I always enjoyed YA, but ever since I started reading more mature YA novels, I've noticed that that's a big difference that is hard for me to explain. If you understand what I'm saying, let me know. I think I'm explaining it okay. It's just it has a more mature, more like present moment rather than so focused on like everything, rather than so focused on looking forward to something. Like for example, a lot of YA books that I've read in the past are very focused on a specific event that the main character is like either looking forward to or dreading, or a specific event in the past that the main character is trying to run from, and they primarily focus on those things. But I feel like in this book, the author did a good job at also having the reader focus on Charlie's present moment as she was healing and working through her self-harm and her trauma. Even if she was doing it on her own, it is by no means unrealistic, but also not necessarily relatable to everyone. Although a lot of parts of Charlie and of some other characters might be relatable. It really just depends on the audience and the person who is reading the book. It's a book that I really wish was eventually made into a movie or TV series. Maybe a limited series might be the best way to handle this book. Something similar to 13 Reasons Why, that type of situation, of course, with trigger warnings and everything. But overall, I really enjoyed the book. It didn't disappoint me. All of the talk on Book Talk and BookTube about it is definitely warrant. It's definitely justified. It's a really good book. So thank you so much for listening.